Thank you very
Yes.
much. I apologize that I don't speak Swedish, so this seminar is in English. A quick introduction to myself. I'm the coordinator of the European Parliament's Anti-Racism and Diversity Intergroup. So in the European Parliament, we have members of European Parliament from different countries and different political groups who have come together to combat racism, discrimination, and other forms of intolerance. This can include anti-Muslim hatred, anti-Gypsyism, Afrophobia, anti-Semitism, LGBTIQA phobia, and also misogyny and discrimination against people with disabilities. One of the key parts of our work is looking at discrimination and hate crimes, but also looking at the online sphere, especially with the rise of social media, and how that correlates with rising hate crime. The correlation between online abuse. We see that many people who had these horrible, racist, xenophobic, discriminatory views, who previously thought that these views were just their views, have now realized that there's a whole community of people all around the world who share the same disgusting, vile opinions. And social media has allowed them to amplify those views because online they found a community of people who have the same feelings as them, that they hate the Muslims, they hate the Roma people, they hate gay people. And what we have seen over the last few years is that we've seen how that from the online sphere has now come and actually impacted people in real life. In my own country, the United Kingdom, we saw a member of parliament, Joe Cox, being murdered before the Brexit referendum. Just 2 weeks ago in Pittsburgh, in the United States, we saw how an anti-Semitic terrorist went and shot people at a synagogue. People just worshiping their faith on a Saturday morning who were murdered, doing one of the most holiest things we see. But we also saw a track record and a pattern with these people. We see that prior to committing their physical action, they are organizing and strategizing online with other people who have the same opinions. And so for us, one of the biggest things that we want to counter is countering online abuse. And online abuse, you can't just counter it through blocking someone. Many people tell me, we can just block. But if you block someone online, the problem still exists. And the problem not only still exists, but it goes away from the mainstream. And so these people go into their little community groups and they're still organizing and strategizing, and they don't have any attention on them. So what we need to think of is a different way of combating this phenomenon. It can be done through legislation and policies, but it can also be done through amplifying different voices, but also promoting counter-narratives. And part of this discussion and our panelists is to discuss the ways we can combat hate speech online, but also look at the effects of hate speech online in terms of political life, in terms of community life, and in terms of other spheres of our society. We have three excellent panelists. We first of all have Soraya Post, a member of the European Parliament from the Feminist Initiative. Soraya sits in the Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs Committee, but also the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Subcommittee on Human Rights. And she's been all around the world looking at this phenomenon, seeing the effect of this phenomenon. And I remind you that this problem is not just limited to Europe. Soraya can maybe speak about it a little bit, but she just come back from Myanmar and Burma, where we see the horrible genocide being committed against the Rohingya in Myanmar. And we see how social media has allowed that to happen, how radical Buddhists in particular have organized and strategized online to be able to target the Rohingya community or the Chin Christians in Burma. Our second speaker is Thomas Aberg, if I pronounce it right, who's a project manager of Online Hate Speech Monitor, which is based in Sweden. And Online Hate Speech Monitor looks at hate speech online in Sweden, but also in other Scandinavian countries, Denmark and Finland, if I'm correct, yes. And our final panelist, who's come all the way from Washington, is Dr. Misha Thompson. Dr. Misha Thompson works in the US Congress Senate, and she's a policy advisor working for the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe. And the commission is a a federal government mandated commission which looks at the situation in Europe in regards to human rights and fundamental rights. And Dr. Thompson has been involved in many of the legislative and transatlantic pieces of work in terms of promoting diversity and inclusion. So we have an interesting panel of speakers who, given the US-European context, also probably don't agree necessarily on the same ways of combating this phenomenon. The United States has a very strong commitment to the absolute right of freedom of speech. And I think in Europe we have a different approach, which is, I think, somewhere in between that absolute right. So we'll have a bit of a discussion on that as well. One thing I would say is just at the European Union level, the European Union has signed 3 code of conducts with the major IT companies: Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Snapchat, and YouTube, and other IT companies. The first code of conduct is on terrorist content online. The second code of conduct is on illegal hate speech online. And the third code of conduct is on disinformation or manipulation of elections and fake news. So these are the 3 code of conducts that the European Union has signed with the IT companies. One last thing I will say before giving the floor is that's an example of soft policies. But in Germany, just this year, the German government decided to have an example of hard law, and they legislated a piece of legislation that requires social media companies to take down illegal content within 24 hours, otherwise they face a 50,000 euro fine. We've seen how that's problematic in one sense, because we saw on the first day, the 1st of January, how the a far-right politician on purpose put a particular status up online to test the legislation. And in the end, when her particular status was taken down, she decided to go to the press saying that this is how the majority political parties are preventing the far right and other parties from being able to have a freedom of expression. We've also seen an anti-racist activist who had her account disabled and her status taken down when she used racist terminology to describe a racist phenomenon. So we can see also the difficulty in policing this particular phenomenon online. We will have, at the end, a Q&A for you to ask your questions to our speakers. Maybe, Thomas, I can come to you first. So we've seen the rise of hate speech online. We've seen how this hate speech then correlates on the ground. What can we do in a practical sense? Apart from the legislation and policies, what can NGOs, like your NGO, do to make people more aware about the phenomenon, but also to speak with law enforcement and other agencies to see how we can combat this particular problem?
Well, that's a very big question. See if I can answer a little bit. First of all, we are talking about in real life and social media. It is the same thing. Now we're so far developed into this social media that real life is on social media. It is internet. So it's no different. Society is online just as much as it's offline on our public spaces and roads, stores and squares and towns. Well, our organization are looking for the most vile content on the social media, on an internet as a whole, the one that is going over all the limits, that is really agitating against minority groups, and we're targeting that speech, not the people behind it, and we are reporting that to the police. That's one thing we can do, but it's not the solution. The law cannot fix this. That's not possible. We need other organizations to take other parts and try to change our view of the internet and social media to see that we need to behave at the same way on social media that we do at the table, at our home, at our workplace. It is not a free place where you can actually commit crime, because that's that's what's happening right now.
So we see it happening, and we see this problem very much present in our societies. But how can we move to a situation where we start to see practical policies or practical things we can do to combat this phenomenon, apart from just blocking? What can we do apart from reporting to the police or reporting to particular agencies or whoever to combat this issue? What in a practical sense, what could we do? Alternative narratives, investing in maybe even changing algorithms and stuff like this. What could we do a bit different?
Yeah, if we go into the technical sense of social media and internet, of course there's a lot of things to do. We are using that when we are scanning the social media for hate crimes, and not only it's criminal hate speech, it's where people say that we need to slay all Muslims or we need to kill all homosexuals. We are using the logarithm and the API for finding these crimes. And of course, social media can do the same. We have a program that scans all the social media and we get hits. That's special words, combinations of words, thank you, that gets a hit, and I get a link towards that comment, and then I read through it and I see if it's a criminal content or not. 95% of it is definitely racist, but it's maybe 3 or 4% of it that is a criminal act. And freedom of speech is so important. I don't think we need a lot of new legislations about this. We need to use the ones we already have.
One concern I've had, or one concern I hear a lot, is who monitors this hate speech? Whose responsibility is it to take down? Now, a lot of people say that it's the responsibility of the platforms to see what their users post and take down that content. But I also hear from the other side people being very worried that we're giving all of this power to the platforms to decide, is this freedom of expression or is this hate speech? The other opposite way around is that people also say that, we can invest in NGOs to be checkers, and they can alert the social media companies who can then, decide to take down that content. But who do you see has the responsibility, or is it a combination between different stakeholders?
I will be a little bit boring and say it's all of us. It's a society who has we are responsible, all of us are responsible. But of course, we see our work a little bit problematic sometimes. We would be really delighted if this kind of went into a government thing with the police, for example, that is actually scanning internet for these over-the-top crimes. But it's also, we also need to put something on the social media platforms. They also have a big responsible, because if I write in a big newspaper something like that, it's not even possible because it's never going to be published. But on social media, this hate is published every day, every second, and it is like a foundation for radicalization. It is right-wing, left-wing, extreme right and extreme left, religious groups, and they are kind of feeding on each other's hate, and it's spreading. So it's all of us. We all have
Before I come to my last question to you, at least for the first round, how many people, it's quite a silly question, but how many people in the audience actually have a social media account? Is there someone in the audience that doesn't have a social media account? So one person. Now, I want to ask you, I want to put you on the spot of why you don't have it, but what can users do? If everyone in the room has a social media account, how can users help us to tackle this problem? What can people in this room and other people do to actually help to deliver some concrete results in tackling this issue?
Be more brave and answer, because in a democracy, we need to talk, and it's very important. And if you see online hate, it's important to act and answer against. But people are afraid to do that because the hate is so big that they are in fear of being targeted themselves. So if everyone is hating Muslims in a group on Facebook where I'm a member, I'm afraid to speak up because then the hate are going to be redirected towards me and I'm going to be the one who is targeted. So it's a lot of fear on social media to be targeted in any way. It is slander, defamation, grave defamation. People are afraid. It's self-censoring. People are censoring themselves because it is scary out there. I'm going through 8-9 hours a day I read hate and only hate, and it is decapitated people, it is pictures that are really, really wild because they are driving this radicalization and it affects people. And it's fake news that maybe are not illegal, but all the comments underneath that fake news is slay all the Muslims. I constantly see pictures of a decapitated head with a Muslim holding it, and then underneath is that when did you last see a Muslim without a head in his hand? That is what's happening every day, all the time, and it's really hard for me to not get affected. And I am kind of vaccinated against this because I work with it. But in the end of the day, if someone holds up a sign with the word Muslim, if I don't think at all, I'm going to say this is a negative word. And how does it affect people to constantly see this in their flow? People get radicalized, and it's scary. I'm really positive about social media, or I was, but after 1.5 years on social media and seeing all the dark sides, it's like the devil.
Yeah. Before, I should have said thank you to the organizers before I started this particular panel. I mean, the whole team at the MR-dagarna have been very good with helping us put this together. But on this issue of fear and this issue of, this online intimidation, then putting off people from coming forward and speaking about it or taking actions. Maybe I come to you here, Misha. A lot of people said to me, like a bit like Thomas said, that social media has allowed minority groups to come together. Before, where we could have also felt isolated at times because we sometimes come from communities where there aren't many other people that look like us. Suddenly, when we went online, we saw a whole community of people who were like us, who were facing the same problems, the same challenges, and everything else. So I can also see the benefits of what social media has allowed us to do. It's allowed us to organize, to strategize. But you work in the US Congress, you work with members of Senate, members of Congress. How do you see the chilling effect of social media on them coming forward and being able to speak out? Like, how is it for African American members of Congress and Senate who are constantly, getting death threats online or, being called the N-word or, being told to go back home or wherever it is? How do you see that, and what that chilling effect, what does that have on democracy then?
So first of all, thank you for allowing me to be here today. Especially, I think, at this time when, we have so many important things going on, including our recent elections. I think as you all started with the internet, social media, just new technology has really been a wonderful thing for a number of our democracies. I think especially in being able to highlight a diverse set of views, opinions, assisting in organizations for various groups of people, and really a way to, I think, kind of further open the door in our democracies. As you've also mentioned, there are some challenges that have arisen with that as well. We not only work with members of Congress, and I should say I'm from a commission that is bipartisan, so it's Republican and Democrat. But we've also worked with a group of young elected officials from across both North America and the United States. And social media has been very interesting. So these are the under 35s. So a number of them use social media as a tool to actually organize their campaigns, to help to get their voters out, to help bring new issues and conversations into the political sphere, so that, you know, if a community feels like they need to talk about safe water, you know, this is something they can introduce, and so to, you know, actually sometimes broaden the conversation. And so I would definitely say for the people that we work with, social media, just technology generally, has been very helpful. And we're finding with a number of younger candidates, it's actually helped them to break into the democratic space in ways that have previously been very difficult. Now with that has come some challenges, and I think it's exactly some of the things that you were talking about. So someone will, you know, put out an opinion on something, and then, you know, right under that there are a number of different negative comments. We've you know, had people say they're going to organize something, and someone writes them a threatening message. So like, if you show up here and you give this speech, you know, we're going to get you. So we've had a number of things like that. I think even more unfortunate, people's families, you know, just their campaign teams, et cetera, have been threatened. And we've had some, unfortunately, some very serious cases where people have been injured in their line of work as a public servant. And there were threats from people, et cetera, online. I'll say what's changed a bit for us is that these things are taken more seriously. So actually one of the first problems were not so much that these threats and things were taking place. We found that a number of people, especially in public life, weren't necessarily reporting them. It was kind of as if people thought that this went with the territory. And so they weren't necessarily reporting them to the police. And so in a sense, by the time it got to the, you know, point where it was really intimidating or threatening, there had not been a track record established. One of the other things that we found are for people that are from diverse communities or considered to be more or less a minority in that space or field. So for women, for, as you said, African Americans or people of color, Muslims, et cetera, they were getting a higher number of intimidating or threatening messages. And unfortunately, this isn't something we just found in the United States. We've actually been seeing it throughout Europe. And so this has also really challenged increasing diversity and representation in public life and public spaces, and is actually a real concern and threat to our democracies. Now, there have been a number of, I think, initiatives around how you begin to address that, but I want to actually turn things back to Alpheus, you know, quickly, just so I'm not speaking too long and at this point.
I mean, I think it comes, I mean, the one follow-up question I would say is that, you know, how much of a threat, is this a threat to, you know, you don't only just work, your commission works on European countries, the wide OSCE region. Do you see that, you know, how much of a threat is it in particular countries where you don't have, let's say, the appropriate safeguards? You know, I think in the United States, in some Western European countries, even though we have strong legal systems and safeguards, we still see it being very problematic. And I'm trying to think, like, you know, how much more of a threat is this when it comes to countries that don't have those strong legal systems? I mean, especially when it comes to issues around democracy and, like, you know, disinformation and how elections and other things can be manipulated, which then bring into power politicians who start to carry out, you know, policies that you know, target minorities and stuff. Like,
well, I'll say it's concerning across the board. So we've actually had more and more members of our Congress, our electorate, actually have to have security when they're at events. There have been entire initiatives to, from some members of Congress to actually who know that their colleagues are being threatened to actually make sure that there is security. So it's actually even gone beyond the people at some point. And I don't want to highlight people in particular, But we're in a very polarizing political season, unfortunately. And there are a number of people who want to really, act us out physically. So it has become a real concern, and if you even just kind of go through images, more and more you'll actually see certain, I would say, very high-profile figures, being accompanied by security. So it really is a growing issue, and that's just in the United States. We've seen throughout Europe, people actually having to leave their homes, change their addresses, work with governments to make sure that they're being provided security. We've also had people just decide they're going to step out of the public light. And this is where we're saying it's also become very problematic, because then that also impacts, again, who's taking part in your democracy, who's being represented, but also at the end of the day, who's at the table for making your policies and moving society forward. And so if you don't have that representation, it becomes really problematic. The other thing is there are kind of dimensions to this. So if you're a woman, we're finding things are more around sexual violence. So we're going to do certain things to you. And it's a different type of intimidating factor. If you're a person of color, it might be more about your race or harkening back to history. And so we had a number of situations where in the United States, for example, they said, we're going to hang you. And that harkens back to a time where communities would actually take African American members and publicly hang them in a square because they had made some transgression, supposedly in the community. If you're of a specific religious background, again, it kind of tags on to what you're saying. So it can be anything from things that people would consider very offensive, either to their religion or or about their faith. So we're seeing that it also takes different angles. But I think one of the larger things that's happening is it's not just in a sense, the bigotry, but it's now also this real link with violence that's coming along and targeting people. And so we've also seen people's addresses being highlighted on things, people tracking people, so-and-so is going to be here now. And then the last piece I kind of want to say to this, I'm talking about public officials now, but we've also had this a lot with our journalists, and people haven't talked about it as much. And so even journalists now are concerned about going and being in certain places where they're reporting, whereas for a very long time, journalists were kind of seen, off limits. They were kind of this objective person that was going to come in and report on a situation. So that's whether they were at a large demonstration or whether they were coming to speak, they're going to cover something that, was maybe considered a hot topic like climate change or something like that. But we're also seeing journalists actually being attacked and intimidated as well, to the point where one reporter actually said, there's certain stories we will not put a junior reporter on because we feel like it's too dangerous. And so it's also, again, limiting our democracies as far as press as well.
And I think, that's a good point to stop there on, because freedom of expression, everyone says, is absolute, right? But in Europe, we've had 3 journalists murdered in Malta, in Slovakia, and in Bulgaria, just in the last 1 year. So, in the spirit of keeping freedom of expression and freedom of speech, at the same time, in some cases, we see that actually it limits it the other way around, because, we see journalists being attacked for just doing their job and reporting. And I think that's something very important to take forward in the discussion, to also look at that particular piece or angle. Maybe I can come to you, Soraya. Maybe a personal question first, not to put you on the spot, but it's a brave thing to be a Roma woman in politics, to take that step, to be one of the few Roma politicians in Europe, but more specifically in the European Parliament. Misha talks about the importance of having a seat at the table, of having representation. So my first question is, when you first became elected, how much abuse did you face?
During the campaign, I had to wear a bracelet with direct contact with the police. I got threatened at my house, people waiting outside my apartment. and videos, you know, all this stuff. And of course, it gets you feel scared, but when you see that it is so visible and is so close to you, you really realize that you even have to fight more against this. And I must say, during these 4 years now, I see the tendencies and the growth of this nationalism and extreme right are growing so fast, and they are using so many democratic tools also to create their presence at the democratic arena. So for me, it felt, how to say, okay, I'm a target, but it's my duty and to respect for my voters. I felt very obligated to deal with this now and use that platform as the European Parliament is, and try to get allies inside the European Parliament who maybe are not direct targets, to make them realize the situation some of us are facing, and not only because of ethnicity, I would say also because of my gender. And I have, as Alfia said before, I have been traveling across the world because I belong to these committees, and as I am devoted to work on human rights and democracy and rule of law, it makes me meet people, other women politicians in different parts of the world, and the same stories everywhere. They are not protected. They don't get the same media attention, and at the police station they are not protected. Police are supposed to protect them, but also the police are violating their rights. So, to be a woman and to be an ethnic vulnerable group is difficult, but nobody else will do it, so we have to do it. Women has to do it.
And maybe I can come there that, okay, so you wanted your seat at the table because you wanted to represent people. So you were willing to sacrifice, let's say, in one sense, your own personal security and your family's security because you felt that this was an important thing to do.
Yeah.
But then you've done something a bit different, because I know many politicians who come from your background or similar background, they say that, okay, once we're elected, we're going to go and work in a completely different field because, you know, if we start to work on Roma issues or Muslim issues, or we start to champion the unpopular issues, the issues that the far right hate us for, then we make ourselves even more of a target. But you've done the opposite. I mean, when you came to the parliament, just 2 weeks ago, you authored a resolution on combating neo-fascist violence, where you called for a ban on far-right and Nazi groups in Europe. That's another level of, you know, commitment. I mean, like, you didn't feel scared by the whole process, that, you know, that you're actually making yourself even more of a target?
No, I am not a scared person. And yeah, I'm not scared. I'm more scared of the silence. If I feel scared, if I feel fear, then I would say, express it like, I fear the created fear done towards the mainstream society by these nationalists. And I mean, I am 62, I have children, I have grandchildren, all of us. I mean, we are a big society across this planet. And I think there have been people before us who have been taking a stand against all this. And then it became a time of, how to say, to feel comfortable. We didn't take the responsibility. We left it to politicians or the others. And I think we reached a time where all of us, as you were in, it's all of us the responsibility. And I think we are in that time now that all of us has to take the privileged right, which we have, political and citizens' rights and, you know, all this, to really make them practical, to go out again, to stand on the streets, on the squares, and to defend what we have been establishing, because it's not for granted. I mean, it's also, I would like to blame not only the extreme right, I would like to blame the mainstream parties, political parties. because they didn't do their job, really. And so, as a feminist, I count on the feministic democratic movement. And I think this is what we have to create, a global one, because it is not a national problem. It's not only in Sweden or in Finland, but we have to act as in our states, but we have to have a global political mindset, because it is a global challenge. And like internet, it's global. And it's seconds. It's about seconds, yeah? So we have to create some strategies how we will do it. And why I thought about the resolution is there is a Council framework decision from 2010 from the European Parliament, European Union, but member states does not implement it. They don't use it as a tool, and they should. And I don't say that this is the only tool, but it is one of the tools. And we can also see in some of the member states, it's not enough, the rule of law is not enough. You have to have democratic institutions. You have to strengthen the civil society. That's a way, I think, or different kind of tools, how to fight against all these tendencies. And of course, on politicians' shoulders is also to create a future vision, which which take away the fear. And what is it about? What is it we should feel fear about? We have to take the ownership.
And before I turn over to the audience, my last question to you, you're a female politician. I think female politicians, and especially those female politicians of color, have the most abuse. It seems like, that in the UK, I mean, for example, the most prominent black female politician is the one that is most abused. But as a politician and as someone who's been working and going all around, do you sometimes think that the abuse you get is belittled or spoken about in a different way compared to your male colleagues or to women who aren't necessarily women of color? Like, do you think that, your reports and stuff are seen as less than theirs?
Yes, but this is the patriarchal problem we face every day at all levels, anywhere. So, of course, you have to have that in mind, of course. But, how to say, I usually act, I am equal. And nobody else can tell me that I am not. Because as soon as I recognize that I am not equal, I will be, they will act as me as a lower class or. And the abuse, of course, it looks different. I mean, sex abuse is very common. And also minimizing us as humans is also very common. But I would like to strengthen the women more and think about you and not them. Because the others, whoever they are, will never do it for you. We have to do it. And so I think it is important to empower the civil society, empower women organizations. I'm not in favor of women committees because we are excluded from the real arena. And women, important issues, and I seldom speak about women's rights, I speak about human rights. And there is a difference, and we have to make that difference to get real recognition. And so stronger women who stand up for human rights, who stand up that they are human, despite gender, of course, and also to fight for other groups. Because also inside a women organization, there is discrimination. There is a hierarchy on who is the right woman. And that is because of class, ethnicity, age, all this. So the fight is very divided and broad. But we have to do it. It depends on us.
Yeah, I think the intersectional approach is very important. I
Yeah.
mean, especially in the argument about the way women's rights are protected. I think if you look at trans women or Muslim women or black women, sometimes their issues are the issues we consider at the end and not the issues we consider at the beginning, when they're actually facing multiple discrimination that I would say that other women perhaps don't face in the same way. Not to say that any one is more important than the other, but we need to start looking at things from an intersectional perspective. I want to now switch over to the audience. Before I do, I just have one question again. How many people have been the victims of abuse online? So we can see the correlation between, I think most people have faced some kind of victimhood online. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, so we have one here. Can you introduce yourself as well? I think someone is coming with a mic.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Elaine from the University of Central Lancashire in the UK, and I've come over specifically for this conference, so this is really interesting for me. My question, I guess, is sitting here with everybody, and we're all nodding in agreement and everything, you know, we all feel that violence online is a terrible thing and we need to do more to stop it. How do we stop it when one of the biggest perpetrators is the leader of the free world, and President Trump abuses people not only online but in person as well, in, you know, in forums such as, you know, news conferences and things? How he normalizes it.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions, perhaps? I see a lot of people nodding, but not so many questions. One question here.
Hi, I'm Valeria. I'm 14 years old from a school here in Stockholm. And I was just wondering, like, I'm a bit scared of this generation because, like, I got people in my class and they're like racist and things. And I'm just, have you ever considered or like thought about if you should, like, people should work with these things in schools? Like, yeah, I was just wondering.
That's a good question. One more, I take one more before I go back to the panel. Anyone brave enough? Another one? We have one over here.
Hi, hello, my name is Karen da Costa. I'm from the School of Global Studies, University of Gothenburg. My question is about what is the different or novel character of social media in relation to other media that puts more in danger democracies? And who should tackle that? I know you mentioned a bit, should be the social media companies, should be maybe international organizations, the UN, should be individual governments. How could we move to make sure that democracy is protected? Yeah, and I originally am from Brazil, and you may have followed as well in the electoral campaigns. Social media has been a huge tool for the winner candidate, who is, by the way, racist, misogynist, and so very bad character, I would put. But also women's organizations use social media and mobilize against him. So how we can make sure that the opposition also explores the benefits of social media skillfully. Yeah,
okay, so we have three questions. How do we tackle social media in the age of President Trump and Twitter diplomacy? The second question on should we be going into schools and teaching and having better education systems on these issues? I think we can also talk about counter-narratives there. And the third thing, you know, the balance, you know, between social media, the good, the bad. But, you know, are we giving maybe too much space to social media because we have such a broad landscape of media? Before I come to you, I'm going to be a bit greedy here. On President Trump, I think, I don't know how many followers he has. I think maybe it's 12 million, maybe, I think. When you look at that as a proportion or as a percentage, it's not that many. I sometimes believe that our media has been, he's used social media for our media then to amplify it. And I think sometimes it's the problem of our media. I'm not trying to tell the media what they can or what they shouldn't do, but they've allowed him to use this platform because they've amplified his platform with these stupid tweets at hours that we're all sleeping. But I think, we have to then start to question, how is our media reporting? Because if someone only has 12 million followers, I say only when you compare it to the amount of users, how is that Twitter account, I know it's the President of the United States, but how is that Twitter account then, putting out all of his messages which are then being amplified? Maybe it's a bit more difficult now because he's the president, but when he was just Donald J. Trump 3-4 years ago, as as this billionaire, we were giving him then the publicity. And when it was questioning whether Obama was born in the United States, or some of his other comments about marginalized communities. So I think we have a question about the media there, about the role the media play. Maybe Thomas, on the education, maybe the work you're doing, or if you're going into schools, or is there something being done at education level?
Well, what we see at the online hate monitor, that young people are much better at looking at media in a critical way on social media. They do not, for example, we have increased the conviction rates in Swedish courts with 1,000% of online hate crimes, 1,000%. And the age is 50 to 60 years, most of the perpetrators. We see very few under 30. So yeah, education is of course very important, and I think it's actually quite good education at schools. You are having a totally different education than I had. You are learning how to be critical about what you read. I didn't have to do that because I had evening newspapers that were printing things that were not hate in any way, but it was, if you have a sneeze, you can die. That was about it. But now on social media, the news that are fabricated are something totally new. And I think that my generation and older, we don't really have the tools to see through this. And that's why young people are much better. But education, everyone, we need more education. This is about education. To get this is this,
And like, for example, in my class, there are not so many people that know about like racist things, sexism, LGBTQ,
Exactly.
and that kind of things, and the teacher never talks about it. Like, you have to learn it in your I have to Google things, I have to look at websites, I have to like know, is this true? Does this happen? I can't, like, my teacher never tells me, my teacher never taught me anything about that.
I think before I let you come, but before I say, I think it all comes back to decolonizing education. I think we spend so much money on all these other things that where we could make a big investment is actually looking at how our education system teaches about history, about what's happened in the past, but also about the rights of minorities. I mean, our education system is a very Western, egocentric kind of education system that doesn't teach about the contributions of Roma people, African American people, or the fact that, LGBTI people have existed, but, something of colonization that, we suddenly became, as a society, homophobic or anti-gay. Sorry, maybe you want to come.
Yeah, I think there is a need, absolutely, and I have tried to propagate for this many years now about human rights education in school. I mean, when I was in a commission working on human rights in Sweden, we sent out an inquiry to the different municipalities and asked how do they deal with human rights and what is human rights. And at the highest level, at civil servants, they refer, yes, it has something to do with the UN. So the level of knowledge about human rights, about LGBTI rights, minority rights, or a right-based approach at all is very limited in the Swedish schools. And I know for once I was in a big conference with university students at high level who are going to be civil servants like teachers, socionomes, whatever. And there was a question about if they know who are the national recognized minorities in Sweden. And let's say it was like 200 people, and 5 people raised their hand and didn't know that we have in Sweden 5 recognized ethnic minorities. And so the knowledge is very low. So yes, one tool is to absolutely to have more education about our rights. And there is a need to create awareness among the mainstream. There is a need for campaigns, more education about what is democracy, what is human rights, all this. And there is a need to share good practices around this topic. And I think, as I said before, we have been put in some kind of comfortable zone that we take everything for granted. But yes, and it's true, in Europe, we are still, we are far away from perfect when it comes to human rights, the respect for human rights. And now we can see a decrease of it. But we are still the best in the world. So what I try to do is to share good practices with other continents, like when I go to some countries in Africa, or when I go to Vietnam or Myanmar, etc. And in the parliament, every month when we gather in Strasbourg, we have 3 urgency resolutions where there have been violated the human rights, democracy, or rule of law, just to make it, to give it visibility and try to change. And very often when we go for these missions, yes, but you in Europe, you are not that good. You look at the Roma situation of Roma, etc. And I cannot defend that. I can just say, yes, we are not good, but at least we are trying to get better. We did try. Now we have, as somebody said, the language has changed very much among the mainstream. So I think it is a problem. And I don't know if you spoke about it, I don't remember, because when we speak about radicalization, we speak about radicalization and recruitment for ISIS. But there are other forms of radicalizations, like built on Christianity. We are the real Christians, and we have to convince our society that the Christian values are the only one, and what comes with that. So there is a kind of huge kind of brainwashing at different levels. And for this, I believe education is the strongest tool to be aware. So we can defend.
Conscious of time, maybe I come to you, Misha, but just to maybe go to that question there from the lady on the left, that we talk about social media here, but in the United States you have Fox and Friends. In my country you have the newspapers, the Daily Express, the Sun. Yeah. As Thomas, you say that, it is people who are an older age who are some of the perpetrators that you're finding. These people don't necessarily are using social media. They're getting the information from TV, from newspapers. So maybe that's one question, and then maybe you have some comments on.
So, wow. So I'll say a few things. I think what's been interesting about the political season over the past few years is that it's woken a lot of people up. So in the States, we say not only get woke, but stay woke. So people have been waking up about their democracies and the fact that it is something that you have to work for, you have to protect. And sometimes you have to go out and fight for it. And so that means communities really need to come to each other's aid. So whether that's online or in person. I think, but also this idea that people can do the work. And so for a very long time, there was also this idea that someone that's really high up or whatever, they're supposed to take care of everything. So if there's trash on the street, it's because, my mayor didn't come pick up the trash. If my roads didn't get fixed, it was the president's problem. And so people really weren't actually using government in a number of different ways. They didn't even necessarily know who people were. They didn't know who their local official was. They didn't know who their city council person was. They only paid attention to, certain elections. And so in that, a lot of responsibility had been, I would say, abdicated, to people who, in some cases, were doing their jobs really, really well, but nobody knew about it because it wasn't necessarily advertised, and some people who weren't. And so now people are paying attention. They're participating, and I think they're making decisions as to what they want their democracies to look like. One of the things we're focusing on is what life is going to look like in 2050. So what it's going to look like in the United States, what it's going to look like in Europe, and one of the things that we know, because it's happening already, is we're moving towards a population where there isn't going to be a particular majority race. We know that we're going to have diversity of faith. This is also happening in Europe. So what it means for us, if we want our democracy to stay strong, we're going to have to be able to have people that can be doctors and lawyers and nurses. They're going to have to work in our military if we want to be secure. And guess what? They're not all going to look the same. They're not all going to pray the same, all those things. And the same thing is going to happen in Europe. And so if we want to preserve our democracies on both sides of the Atlantic, if we want to continue this partnership, that our countries and our governments have had for so many years, we're going to have to figure out not only how to work together, but I think also to consider all of us as part of our societies and our communities. So if for some reason someone is attacking this, young Muslim girl over here, that is the same as attacking my child. She is the future of my country. Why am I not stepping up for this child or this person? If someone's going after my colleague, how come I'm not saying something in the office? If I see someone not getting promoted. So people really are going to have to start to step up in many different ways. And that's why we have this larger symptom problem where, of course, people can say all these things and stuff online because it's been going on this entire time in our societies and we have not stopped it. And so I think we're either going to decide we're going to go to the roots of some of these issues, and some of that does have to do with history and going back to the curricula and those types of things, and figure out how to talk about these things. Or we're not. We're going to sweep it under the rug again, and we're, going to let these things go. My hope is that we're going to do the work. It's going to be hard. Like if you look at our population, we're really like at a 50-50 split right now. People really see two different directions for our country. But I remember a time where that wasn't what we were seeing. So, my hope is that we can really start to think and work towards the future. A number of folks are woke. The whole thing is now is you got to stay woke, but you also got to do the work.
And Thomas, very quickly.
Just to ask very quickly about the social media platforms and their responsibility. We are 3 people in the online hate monitor, and we can increase the conviction rate with 1,000%. We can find all this. So of course the social media platforms also have a big responsibility, and they can work. If they have 10,000 on Facebook that are looking at comments, I'm sure that we 3, just mostly within Sweden, we can find and see about 2,000 people that are the most extreme, that are really spreading hate on social media. It's on VK, it's on Facebook and Twitter and so on. And these social media platforms, if they just see possibilities instead of just seeing problems all the time and just saying, oh, this is not possible, shut them off, these people that are spreading hate. They are not that many. We're going to see a total different climate on the social media platforms.
Thank you. That's it. We have to wrap up. But I really want to say thank you to the panelists, but also the people you don't see in the background, the people from the putting together the videoing and the stage and everything else, and of course our interpreters. So thank you to all of them, and thank you to the panelists, and thank you to the audience. Thank you.